For us at Hermi, it is absolutely important that our findings and data add value to the work of human rights activists and advocates on the ground and allows them to better engage with their governments to improve the lives of people in their countries. And it is with that intention that we have guest experts on India as well as China who will now share their comments and views on our newly launched data for these two countries. I am absolutely thrilled and honored to introduce our panelists. We have with us Simon Cheng. Simon is a Hong Kong exiled pro democracy activist and founder of Hong Kong diasporic nonprofit organization, Hong Kongers in Britain, which is headquartered in central London. And our final panelist is Benedict Rogers, a human rights activist and co founder of Hong Kong Watch. He's also a senior analyst for East Asia with CSW and is on the advisory boards of several organizations, including the Interparliamentary Alliance on China and the Stop Uyghur Genocide Campaign. As an Asia specialist, he has written for many international media portals and has authored 7 books, including on Myanmar and China. A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being with us today. With that, I think I will now quickly turn to our human rights experts on China. Simon, Ben, thank you very much for your patience and for joining us. Just like we asked our guest experts on India, you have also had access to China's scores and findings. I'd like to know what stood out the most for you. So, Simon, I'll first come to you for you to share your thoughts based on your own work and experience. What in the data stood out the most to you?
Yes, thank you so much for the hermit. I think that first of all, when I see the result, is actually quite down on earth to reflect the reality what I have seen in Hong Kong and in China. I think apparently that what stood out is about the political rights that is going to be worse and worse recently. I think also that we could see that's the safety from the state, that's the public confidence of the safety from the state if they've been, involved in any activities relevant to, the criticism of the government or those people in power, then they will feel unsafe. So that's the result is pretty well expected, especially after the national security law has been imposed a few years ago. So I also think that's impressed me about the rights tracker is because that's the you differentiate 2 different category of the political and civil rights, which first of all is safety from the state, and second is empowerment. Then I think it's quite important to make this lie clear, because what we can see in Hong Kong, the safety from the state is slightly higher score than the empowerment. I think it's just because the safety from the state will be more defensive, which means that how could you feel at least say that you can hold your freedom tight in your hometown. But for example, empowerment, that's more progressive, that to see your rights, that you could vote for anyone that's in the government, or that you have more proactive right to assert your political opinions or expression, etc. So it make really sense that when we say, in Hong Kong, that's still a certain freedom, but it's been curtailed bit by bit and going to be worse and worse. But empowerment for a long, long time, that we want to fight for a full democracy, for political rights, that we can get universal suffrage, can get 1 person, 1 vote for our political leader. But it's always been unsatisfied, and also at the moment under this constitution is unachievable. So I think this kind of thing would reflect why we would see that's the safety from the state and the empowerment that would be different criteria, and that's a different type of score that we have seen. And of course, that quality of life, I think it's also important that we could take into the consideration, which is also a core part of human rights as economic and social rights. Although that we could see in China that is going to be improving, and also in Hong Kong that is a pretty high score as well. It's better than average based on the rights tracker, Hermé. However, I would see that would be affected bit by bit when the people, they still cannot achieve democracy or even that they feel unsafe.
Right.
We already have seen that the brain drain to happen, and it would affect the quality of life bit by bit. That is a bit harder to solve about the long-standing issue of housing and also the social inequality. So I think that would be a bit by bit will affect even the quality of life in the future. So thanks for this, because from my perspective, for example, when I've been just attend some human rights meeting in Geneva, relevant to the United Nations Human Rights Council and Human Rights United Nations Special Rapporteur, I think this kind of the data would be more scientific to provide to civil servants, officials, and international organization to see, you know, the criteria that what we should see, how better that they could improve. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Simon. Ben, I now come to you. And again, this question to you is in the context of your new book that is due to be published later this year, on which will speak a lot more about China. What in the data did you find most striking, or did you see any congruence between your own research and work and our new data? Over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, I agree very much with what Simon has said. And I think that the data is not a surprise, I think, to anyone working on China and Hong Kong, but it does very much reinforce and confirm what we know kind of more anecdotally. And I think the fact that, particularly in terms of safety from the state and civil and political rights, China is very clearly one of the very worst performers in the world. And I think seeing that measured in the way that you've measured it, rather than just through anecdotal and testimonial evidence, is very valuable. I think one of the things that particularly comes through is that although I think the situation in China has become more and more repressive across the board over the last decade under Xi Jinping, particularly intense repression, it affects ethnic and religious minorities. And we've certainly seen what I would say is the worst crackdown on freedom of religion or belief, particularly for Christians, really since the Cultural Revolution. And then, of course, with the situation in Xinjiang for the Uyghurs, which both the previous and the current US administrations, several parliaments, and an independent tribunal, the Uyghur Tribunal, have all concluded amounts to genocide. I think the fact that religious and ethnic minorities are highlighted as most at risk, along with, of course, dissidents and human rights defenders, is very striking. And I think that one of the other things I would highlight, I know the focus in this discussion is particularly on China, but having looked at the Hong Kong data as well, is the fact that, again, empowerment is so low in Hong Kong, and that really reflects the dramatic deterioration and dismantling of Hong Kong's freedoms in recent years. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, but I think it just really confirms what we already know, and I hope it can be used to persuade policymakers around the world to think about how they respond.
Right. Thank you for your response. I do see a large consonance in the responses of almost all our guest experts. Now, if you were to just sum up your thoughts, what would your call to the Chinese government or to the world at large be based on the data that you've seen? Just to sum up your thoughts briefly. Simon, would you like to go first?
I think that's this kind of scientific, at least I would say that's more, that's data could give a very clear signal to all, the sovereign states that they can't really say that there has with different standards in different country. That's also what the Chinese Foreign Ministry always claim, that they have their own standard of the human rights.
Right.
I think that's which we should use this kind of the index, and things will be more systematic and coordinate. We're not leaned on anyone's like block of the nations, or we're not standing in any one national interest to say anything. We don't want to be regarded as like a pawns in the international relations or in the chessboard or something. That's always being the blame game between several great powers, and is also what China's always, that they would say, oh, that is politicized, that is what the West would be stigmatized me or something. But by providing this kind of index, we have been very fairly criticized if there has any true human rights violation around the world. Even we could see United Kingdom, United States, in other country, we also could see that should be some worrying signals that we need to face and address. So to China as well, but we do feel that the scale is different. We know that, human rights, the situation around the world is not perfect, but it still have some rooms to improve. And we honestly and generally see China is still a bit lower than average, that they should improve. I think that would be important, that if we escalate it to the United Nations, that's more recognizable, more independent, more impartial data for them to take it as a reference for the future reports that they could submit. Thank you.
Right. Benedict, I come to you for your thoughts.
Thank you. Well, first of all, just picking up on Simon's point about the United Nations, I very much hope that even though she's leaving office later this year, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, will take this data very seriously. She was recently in China, as many of you will know, and in my view, she didn't handle her visit to China in the way that I would have hoped her to. But I hope when she sees this data, that will remind her just how serious the situation is. But if I may, just very briefly, I think I'd have three recommendations for policymakers around the world in light of this data. The first is that I think, well, overall, I think countries should completely rethink our approach to China. And there are three things I think they should do. The first is and the US has done this, but I think others should, to impose targeted sanctions on those responsible for human rights violations, individuals in the Chinese government and Chinese companies and entities complicit with violations. I think if there is no penalty for the very grave human rights violations that the regime is perpetrating, then it will just be emboldened to become even more repressive. The second thing I think governments around the world should do is to really extend what I call lifeboat policies to enable those who need to get out to do so and to find sanctuary around the world. That's been done to a certain extent for Hong Kongers, although there's more that could be done, but I think there's also more that could be done to help Uyghurs and Chinese Christians, Tibetans, Chinese dissidents. And then the third thing that I hope governments will think about is for those governments that still have extradition agreements with either China or Hong Kong, I hope they will think about suspending or cancelling those agreements, particularly when the data shows, if I've got this correct, that China is the lowest in the world in terms of the death penalty. And so the high risk of extraditing people to China where they could face either the death penalty or very serious forms of torture, that risk is very high. And I would apply that certainly to political cases, but even to genuine criminal cases. It's ironic that many countries that don't have the death penalty, particularly in Europe, still have extradition agreements with China where people could face the death penalty. So those would be my recommendations for governments to think about. And I think this data really reinforces the message I've been trying to put out for some years, along with many friends and colleagues, that we need to completely rethink our relationship with not the people of China, but the regime of China.
Right. So I think I think this is a much larger conversation, but thank you so much to all of you for sharing your reflections and insights with us. I take the liberty of speaking on behalf of my team here, and I say that we admire and are so grateful for the work that all of you do. And we certainly hope that our data is useful and relevant for your work, as well as for the work of our wider human rights practitioners community, to continue to do what they do to engage, advocate, and ensure respect for human rights for all.